Welcome back. I'm here with Preston Dennett. Today, we are going to discuss what to do if you have any sighting, paranormal, UAP, or otherwise. Welcome back, Preston.
Thanks, Sean.
Okay, so if you notice something unusual, let's take it from the perspective of if it's kind of an ambiguous sort of sighting. What kind of steps should you take to A, document it, and B, at what point should you report it, and to whom should you report it to?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would recommend to anyone who sees anything in the sky is get another witness. If it's still there, get another witness. Because a simple, unconfirmed sighting where you're doubting your own eyes can turn into a multi-witness case, can turn into, a very widely viewed case very quickly. And if you can start calling people in other areas nearby, you can triangulate it. This would be, probably not super likely because often these are very fleeting events. But given the opportunity where you see something, do not hesitate to get in. That would be the number one thing you should do. Second, photograph it. We all have access now these days to a cell phone. And it's amazing how many cases there are of this stuff where people don't photograph it when they have the ability to do so.
Why is that? Is that because I know there's some cases where people see something, but they don't. It's almost as if they don't feel compelled to, as part of that sighting. Do you have a sense for what's driving that?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things. Guilty, by the way, of that. Because when I saw a very close-up sighting, I did have a camera with me. I didn't even think of it. So I think one of the things is you are just so utterly amazed that it drives that from your mind. You don't want to take your eyes off of it.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be part of it.
Another factor is they are often very fleeting events. And another is there's sometimes direct influence on the part of the ETs. They know. There was a case I interviewed of a guy who had a camera on the front seat. And each time he reached for it, something would happen. And he said it was the weirdest thing. Because I really wanted to take a picture, but for some reason I just couldn't. And I have a guy who had a camera and pointed it right at the thing, and it powered down. And he pointed away, and it powered up. Powered down. When he pointed, powered up. He experimented with this in many cases where people have put their cameras up and boom, the power goes out. So there's direct influence there in some of these cases. But I would recommend that because a photograph is worth more than you know when you see something like this. So this is assuming that you have the opportunity to get another witness or photograph it. And if you can, even write, a tape recorder, a running commentary. They did this with the Rendlesham Forest incident, and it proved to be very valuable evidence.
Mm-hmm. It was the colonel, right? The colonel who was recording what he was.
Colonel Halt, right? Charles Halt, I think was his name. Any way you can record it, even if you can just write it down and sketch it. Alan Godfrey, a police officer, quickly grabbed his sketch pad and drew the thing as it was there in front of him. Because memory is, a tricky beast. It can be influenced very much by the passage of time and your own, the police investigators have learned this when they do lineups and stuff. And people can be very much influenced by the next thing that comes into their field of vision. People will...
It's like the Phantom Ape experiment, right? Where people are passing balls, right? And you tell people to focus on or to count how many times the ball has been passed. And you can walk a guy in a monkey suit or like a gorilla suit through that group and people won't see the gorilla.
Exactly. Or they've done all kinds of experiments with this where people will give a lecture about various topics or a news story with separate segments. People conflate the stories together. So start putting details into one segment that was not there. It was the other segment that was similar. But so this is just a fault of memory. So as soon as you can, write it down immediately afterwards. They've done this with a lot of UFO witnesses, particularly with this. I wrote a book on schoolyard encounters. There was a case in Rua, Zimbabwe, where some 60 kids saw a UFO.
Is that the Ariel school or is that the Australian? Okay,
It's the Ariel school. But it happened in Broadhaven and happened in a number of cases where the teacher is like, okay, you really saw this? You all sit down. They separated them and had them draw what they saw. And it ended up being very valuable evidence because it showed exactly the same pictures where these kids didn't have the opportunity to collude with each other. And this is, something all investigators know of any field, whether it's, criminal research or what have you. You write it down. And this is particularly important with UFO encounters, which have amnesia problems, not just with onboard experiences and missing time, but simple sightings. There was a case in England where a guy wrote it down and felt it leaving his head, and he would not have remembered it if he had not written down what he had seen. It was a simple sighting, and he forgot it. Then saw his papers like, oh, shoot, I did see that. So this is, I can't emphasize it enough. Write it down, even if it's a simple, I saw a UFO, because that can be enough to hold on to the memory. So number one, get a witness. Number two, record it in some way, even if it's a drawing or an audio tape or a camera or a written account. That's really important. And thirdly, I've talked to a lot of people who've had these encounters, whether it's a sighting or a landing or an onboard encounter. And I always ask, well, did you call the police? Did you call MUFON? They're like, well, who's MUFON? Mutual UFO Network. 1 in 100.
A quick question about calling the police. Is that generally advisable, given that if you do something like that, you may also be sending a signal to, somebody else?
It can be useful and sometimes not. In the Topanga Canyon wave, a bunch of people called the police. And it turned out that one of the officers there, was very interested in this phenomenon, having received so many calls from this area, which was prevalent with UFO activity, and was very interested and wanted to investigate and come down there. I ended up calling them up. They denied a lot of what I knew to be true. So I caught them in basically a cover-up, whether it was advertent, or inadvertent. I don't know. I can't say
they got a call.
Sure.
They got a call from somebody else. Or they got a call from somebody else saying, "Don't ever speak of this again."
Yeah, it's somewhat of a long story, but in a nutshell, I talked to a number of witnesses who called the police, and the police told them, "Oh, no one called us," and I know that's not true because I talked to the people who called the police, and I got the police tape was snuck out by one of the officers. So, and then I found out, I interviewed one person who said, "Oh, we had a policeman at that dinner party, and he said we receive 100 calls a year." And I said, "No, you have to be mistaken. 100 calls over 10 years." He's like, "No, it's 100 calls a year." And I said, "Okay, maybe." And later interviewed someone who turned out to be at that same dinner party and listened to the same officer and said, "Oh, there was an officer at this one dinner party I was at, and he said he received 100 calls a year." So, well, getting off on a tangent. Yeah,
but some of those calls are going to be, some crazies, right?
But calling the police can be useful because they might provide you information like, yes, someone called us, or provides a record, because people will say, well, when did this occur? And like, well, I don't know, it was sometime in August. Well, the police record all of this stuff. They record all their calls. And no, they don't generally handle UFO reports. They will refer you to MUFON or say, don't, call the Air Force, who will do the same thing in most cases, though not always. I've had people call the Air Force, and the Air Force officers showed up and took their testimony and were absolutely interested in what they saw. One guy called them up and hung up on them. They immediately called him back. This was long before caller ID was a thing. He's like, "How did you get hold of me?" And they said, "Well, we have our ways." You know, of course, they had that ability, I'm sure, long before it was public. But yeah, report it. 1 in 100, and I'm being generous here, report their sightings, and almost nobody will report if they saw an alien. They're not going to tell anybody. Are you kidding? They don't even tell their spouse. So keep a diary, write it down, record it, call somebody, leave some paper trail somewhere. That would be my advice during and immediately after an encounter.
What about ambiguous experiences where, you're not sure of, you saw what you saw?
Write it down still. Even if it's just a title, a little note, like thought I saw a light. Because, a week might go by and your neighbor's like, "Gosh, I had the weirdest experience. I saw a light hovering over your house." And then you can go like, "What day was that?" Because I've had this happen. There's many cases of this where people have gotten confirmation from neighbors or friends or other witnesses in the area. And like June 14th, 1992 was a wave of sightings over Topanga Canyon. And people were seeing stuff all over the canyon, and nobody knew that everyone else was seeing this. And I was able to eventually locate 30 some adult witnesses in separate locations on that one night. So boy, were they delighted to find other testimony on that, that corroborated what they saw. So this can be really important in terms of your own well-being, your own mental sanity. Because I feel really sorry for people who are single witnesses and encounter this stuff, because they do doubt when you see this stuff, your head does weird things. And having experienced this myself, I know what witnesses are talking about when they say, "Well, I didn't want to call it a UFO." First, I'm like, "Is that a helicopter?" Is this ball lightning? What is? They don't want to say it's a UFO, and then it's done, and they're like, "Well, shoot," and they will deny it. People absolutely deny this ever happened if it does not fit their worldview. And if it's so far to their worldview, they won't even remember it or acknowledge it or think about it. This is sort of one of the causes of the missing time phenomena. I think it's not necessarily.
It's not that. It's not them. It's the experiencer, because they just it's like a traumatic response, basically.
Yep. It's the human mind saying, "I'm not seeing that. That's not true." Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. This is not the droid you're looking for. There's a weird influence to the human mind, where if it's something super traumatic or super out of your knowledge base or worldview, you don't perceive it correctly. And there was talk about how when Captain Cook visited the islands of Hawaii and natives saw ships for the first time. I think this is where that story comes from. They did not recognize them as being, ships. Something along those lines. But the important thing is to trust your judgment. Trust your, yes, you did see that. Write it down, and then you'll know that something did occur. So that's when it occurs, and immediately afterwards. There are certain things you should do.
So take us to, let's say you reach out to MUFON. What happens in that instance? How does that work?
Yeah, well, a MUFON researcher will generally first try to determine if this is a case worth investigating. Because if a person says, "Well, there was a green light on one side and a red light on the other and a white one in the middle, and I heard an engine noise,"
It's a car, right? Right.
We can throw this away as a conventional vehicle almost immediately. So,
do people actually report those, things like that?
Yeah, Venus. But there are people who've lived their entire lives in the city and have never seen a shooting star. I had this actually happen. I'm like, "Have you ever seen a UFO?" And this guy's just going, "Yeah, this thing darted across the sky." So I started going down the list, and I was impressed at first. I'm like, wow, and then I started talking about shooting stars. He's like, what's that? I'm like, well, you've heard of shooting stars. He's like, well, yeah. He had never seen one.
Well, that's the other thing too. People could easily because stars pulsate too, right?
Yes. Yeah. Venus is a
like
big
I'm
pulsate.
so familiar with my backyard sky that because I go out there every night and look out, that I know that like that way there's going to be a big red star and it's going to pulsate. Like it's like right above the, you're near the airport. I know that the airport, there's going to be a red light that pulsates, right? That's kind of just beneath my hill that I'll be able to see, right? It just flashes back and forth.
If you see a hovering light, go out there the next night. Make sure it's not there again,
Yeah.
And that it's not Venus. You can look this up fairly easily these days.
Yeah, Venus. It's either Venus or Saturn is like right in front of me, and it's always over the house. It's very bright. You can't miss it.
Yeah,
right.
I was once driving on the road, and I'm like, wow, look at Venus. It's huge. It's like twice. I'm staring at it. This is the freeway on the way home from work. I'm staring at it. I'm like, God, it's bright. And I'm looking at it, and then I looked over to the left. I'm like, oh, well, there's Venus. And I'm looking back at this thing, and I don't know what it was. It's that sort of ambiguous thing. I can't do much with it, but it was there in the sky, and I don't think it was a balloon. I don't think it clearly wasn't a plane. It wasn't anything I could say what it was. And everyone had to be seeing this, but they weren't even looking. So, yeah.
Well, I've heard of anecdotal reports there too, where something will happen that's unambiguous to an experiencer, like in the middle of a crowded freeway, and no one else will notice it.
Yep. I talked to a lady who was at a restaurant on an outdoor patio with her boyfriend, and they saw this UFO. Honest to God, dramatic, full on. Everyone turned and looked at it, and it darted off. And they're like, oh my God, oh my God. And everyone just went back to eating like nothing happened. And I've heard this in other cases.
I mean, what's your interpretation of the event? They all saw it. They got excited and then suddenly forgot, or they just.
I wish I could talk to them and I could give you an answer. There was another guy. I wrote a book about sightings over drive-in theaters of all places. That turns out this is a thing. UFOs have dropped down over drive-in theaters. I've got 100 cases.
Any of them in Barstow?
Very possibly. I don't recall specifically.
I don't know if it's still there, but there's a drive-in theater out in the desert in Barstow, California.
I got one again at the Terrace Drive-in in Bakersfield. I'd have to look it up because there's a lot of them. But one case comes to mind. Scott Santa, I interviewed him. He's had a giant crap come over the theater, blacked the movie out, blacked the snack stand out, blacked everything out. People got out of their cars. They were staring at this thing. And it went overhead. Everything went back on. And he completely forgot it. Everyone forgot it. They all went back into their cars, continued watching the movie. Nothing happened. It was a year later, he saw a UFO book. And blunk, this memory came back into his head. It's like, shoot, I saw this. So this happens. This is one of the memory things that is really funky when it comes to UFOs, which is why you should write it down. That I had an orb sighting myself, where an orb came right in front of my car. I saw it. It's right in front of my windshield. It darted around, went back up. I forgot it. Left my mind. I should have turned around and told my brother and sister-in-law, and I didn't. It was a month or two later. I'm like, wait a second, that happened. I think I may have had missing time. Honestly, I really do.
Meanwhile, I made a video reconstruction of it. Did I tell you that?
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't that hard, but I did it. I recorded the sighting, and I was interviewing another guest, and then as soon as that was over, when I edited the video, I created a reenactment, because it really was, you just take a picture the backyard or record the backyard, and then you just edit in.
Right.
Again, it happened so fast that I still don't know whether, like, how to trust my perception. And so I just tried to record it. I made sure to check the time because it was so bizarre. And then just to record everything that happened around it. So, or just to try to recount everything that happened around it. Like what my state of mind was I tired or not? Wasn't tired. I'm obviously not on any medication or anything like that, but it happened so fast that it might even, like I say, half a second. It might have been even shorter than that, because it was like the lingering after effect that you have, like after, like an after image, right? Because it happened so fast that you have to try to piece it together. So,
yeah. Well, after you have a UFO encounter, report it. And if it's a big one, that definitely asks you all kinds of questions and want to know.
Yeah, but again, it's ambiguous. As we were discussing kind of offline, these things tend to be ambiguous. So like people like me are hesitant to, sure, I'll post it on YouTube, but like, I wouldn't. Police have plenty of other things to deal with. MUFON maybe, but I have to be much more confident and trusting in my senses before I really, report something as certain, right? Like that was enough that I'm trying to piece it together. This is an explanation of what I think happened. But again, we talked, if somebody had shined a spotlight behind my house, it could have been that. It certainly wasn't a helicopter doing it, because I would have heard the helicopter. But
well, here's the point. For all you know, Sean, 3 doors down, this landed in someone's backyard, and they're losing their mind trying to figure out what's going on. They want another witness. They need corroboration, and they're not going to report it. So many people don't report it. And if we had people report this, then MUFON or NUFORC would be like, okay, I just got a call from someone 2 doors down. And so if you do have a sighting, report it, because they may say, well, listen, we found out that there was a balloon launch on that area at that time. Or listen, we got 4 reports tonight in your area.
Yeah, that actually reminds me that we talked about some of those other things when I went to Nextdoor and looked at the local area. One of the things that was posted on one of these videos could very easily have been an illuminated balloon, given the way that it was hovering, right? So that's a great point. All right, well, we'll see. We'll see how this whole thing evolves. But I'm certainly taking notes and writing down dates, right? I could tell you it was August 24th, Friday. I think it was a Friday or Saturday morning, whenever August 24th was. Happened between the hours of 1 and 2 a.m. Pacific time. Very clear skies, clear night.
And you don't even have to report it. You can go to MUFON if you're a member, or NUFORC, the National UFO Reporting Center, and look up their database, time and date and location, and see if there are other reports. Yeah.
I mean, how do you become a member of? Just sign up on the website?
You pay the $20 fee or $40 yearly fee for their little journal and the ability to browse their database, which is quite extensive.
So again, I have a very paranoid mind. Is this some way for the government to track you?
Yeah. This has been a problem with this field. Every UFO citizens group has had real problems with government officials. It started with APRO, the first one, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, which came under direct observation by the CIA. They proved this. They found it out from people within government who they were friends with, and caught a CIA agent, actually in their offices taking some of their stuff. And this happened with numerous UFO groups. NICAP, National Investigative Committee of Aerial Phenomena, fell apart due to this sort of thing. MUFON has definitely have government in it. There's a lot of people who are quite upset about, MUFON in terms of its changes in ownership, and some of the guys who headed it were military intelligence. I mean, come on, it's blatant. It's clear that it's a way to monitor what's going on.
Yeah, and part of it is, is non-UFO related too, right? They have weapons programs that they're working on, and they want to monitor to make sure that people don't spot these craft. And if they do, again, they could be jet engine, jet propulsion, et cetera. But it's a way for them to monitor whether or not there's been leaks related to that. So it's not entirely inimical, but
no, I support MUFON. I do. I'm a member. I became a field investigator for them. I took their test because there's an enormous number of really good people in this community. It's a good resource for researchers and experiencers alike. And so is NUFORC. But that doesn't mean it's perfect. And I am not going to, go down a paranoid avenue saying they're all there to watch us, because I don't think that's true.
Of course not. Right.
No, but I do think that they're, it's purely logical and absolutely almost inescapable that this would be used to monitor what's going on. And I know there are people within MUFON and other organizations who are really upset about some of the stuff that's gone on there. I've seen files disappear from their database. I know because I took screenshots of it and then went back and I'm like, hey. And I've talked to people who recorded, sent files to them, both organizations. And they're not there in the database. And were there at one point. So I don't know entirely how to.
I mean, it's almost like if you tracked those lost files, it's almost as if you've either recorded evidence of non-human, UFO phenomena, craft, whatever, or those files contain evidence of a classified program that the government wasn't. When you see, there's probably examples of both. But it's almost as if the snapshots that you've taken are probably the most interesting cases, right? If the government wanted to make that data disappear.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not going to characterize why they did it because I don't know for sure. But I do know that this happens. And I'm concerned about it because it's not truthful and transparent. And just recently, the Navy said flat out, yes, we have a bunch of videos and we're not releasing them due to national security reasons. So that was a flat out honest to truthful, statement from the Navy saying, we're not doing this. We have it, but we're not going to show you.
And there's probably some percentage of why that would be, like percentage of files or evidence why that would be a good idea. But there's probably some other stuff. And again, the reason that you would do that is maybe there's some sensor technology that we have where we can capture certain aspects of the phenomenon that the Navy doesn't want the Chinese or the Russians to see, for example. But as militaries do the world over, whenever they want to keep things simple. So by making a broad declaration like that to protect the 3% sensor information that they want to protect, they'll just blanket deny all of it. I think didn't they push it out for another 50 years or something like that? I can't remember exactly what they did. Or that was the British case. That was the British. Begins with a C. Calvine.
Oh, yeah.
Where they, I think, classified it for another 50 years or something.
Yeah, I know about that photo. I don't know about it in terms of its legitimacy, honestly. But that's another story.
Interesting.
But yeah, following a UFO encounter, report it because it could be helpful to you and others. And as the days go by, there are other things you probably should do depending on the nature or extent.
To start keeping a journal of what's happening. And
yeah, ask your neighbors, ask around. You can do this discreetly without mentioning the word UFO. Did you see anything weird? anything unusual happen. You don't have to say, guess what? Was abducted by aliens. Did you see aliens? No, just ask them, open-ended questions. Ask other family members, because if this is something that's happening to you and you want to know what's going on, it's very possible that it's happening to people around you. And recording it is important because this can be an event that is repetitive. So we used to think that if someone saw a UFO, it was a once-in-a-lifetime event. This is what investigators thought. And then they started calling what they called the repeater problem. People were reporting UFOs over and over again. I thought these people are nuts. But no, they're not nuts. These are contactees who are experiencing this regularly. So, and there are case after case after case of people who wake up to this in midlife. Whitley Strieber is a good example, who denied, explained away, refused to think about unusual events in his life all the way up until his mid-30s, I think it was, when he couldn't ignore it any longer. And suddenly everything started making sense. He connected the dots, and he found out his parents had seen stuff, his brother, his neighbors. He lived in a hot spot. All this stuff became apparent only after he started really looking into it. So this is something you can take proactive steps. If you have an encounter, write it down and be prepared for this to happen again. And so each time you write it down, this will help keep things straight in a chronology and memory-wise. And if you had an encounter with missing time, that's a whole other ball of wax.
Yeah, definitely not to my knowledge have I ever had something like that. But
people do.
Yeah.
And there's other things you should do. Don't rush over and have hypnosis right away. That would not be my recommendation. First, write down everything you can consciously recall.
And for the audience, that's hypnotic regression therapy, right?
Right. Which is an effective method if used correctly.
And you use the right person.
Yeah, to recall suppressed memories, and has been used by forensic investigators and psychologists for child abuse and war trauma victims and witnesses to crimes who didn't remember everything, but like the license plate number or the color or the tattoos. And remember the show Mythbusters?
Yeah.
They decided to tackle hypnotic regression and see if it works. And they staged a little event for their cast where a guy comes running in and creates a ruckus, then runs out. And they said, okay, everyone, that was a little thing we're doing today. This is our show. Write down what you saw. And everyone's like, oh, okay. Well, I think he had a yellow shirt. What was a shirt? No, don't talk to anyone else. Write down what you saw. And they did. And they said, okay, we're going to put you under hypnotic regression. And it worked. It worked really well. They recalled the tattoo. They recalled the color of the shirt. They recalled the guy's hair, what he said, which they did not recall consciously because it was an unexpected, sudden event that was quickly over and out of the ordinary, which makes memory recall difficult. It worked. It was accurate, is my point. It's not always accurate. There's been some real heavy-duty lawsuits where people recalled stuff under hypnosis from unscrupulous psychiatrists who said, you were a victim of satanic ritual abuse. No, they weren't. And they proved
or you were molested by your parents, right? Like things, like horrible things like that.
Yeah. So used wrongly, it's not good. And that's why I don't generally recommend it. But if you do, then you have your pre-written account of your conscious memories. This is real. You remember it consciously. Because if you do not do that, and you go under hypnotic regression, you will immediately conflate those two together and think, well, this was all conscious recall, or this was all hypnotic. No. Almost everyone who goes under regressive hypnosis to recall missing time has very clear conscious memories of all kinds of unusual activity. So I would very much encourage anyone who has an extensive encounter to really start first by writing it down. Second, meditation, writing down your dreams as well. You know the Betty and Barney Hill case? Very famous. She remembered everything through her dreams and wrote them down. And later went under hypnosis, and her dream recall was better, really more detailed than her hypnotic regression. It was amazingly accurate. She remembered it all through dreams.
Yeah, I have really weird, like don't really correspond with reality.
I'm just saying, it can be very effective. You know, when you dream something from your past, you're like, oh, I hadn't thought about that in years. But you dreamt it. So this is just things that you can look into or do or consider in the event you have a major encounter. Because if you have a close-up sighting, chances are very good you're going to have another. So this is something I want people to know about. And I wish people would do. I made the mistake myself not writing some of this stuff down. So I've learned my lesson. You do forget really prominent details to these events fairly quickly.
Yeah, I think my issue is my brain is very strong at correlating disparate data, right? Like I'll make connections that most people don't make, but sometimes I do that too well. In fact, I'll tell you something after we get off the call that will pique your interest, but it's probably just a highly correlated thing. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's helpful. And I think kind of maintaining some sort of a journal to record this stuff, at least to make sense of it too, right? It could just be correlated coincidences, or not uncorrelated coincidences, right? But just putting it down to paper, at least you keep a track record of things that might seem unconnected that over time you're able to make meaning of it. But again, the brain, one of the problems of the brain is pareidolia, right? We sometimes try to ascribe meaning where there is none. So
faces and clouds and such. But yeah, that's right. As a researcher, it's so much fun when you get corroboration from an outside source. There was a case where a UFO landed on Playa del Rey Beach. And it's a classic case where 3 cars, the engines stopped and there was landed saucer on the beach with 2 humanoid figures. And there's a lot of, controversy about the case because this is kind of outlandish. But using databases, I found out that, in fact, Long Beach, there was 100 reports of UFOs coming to the police officer station on that day. And also the nearby Air Force Base just down the way there was detecting stuff on their radar on that same day. So this is, perhaps not direct confirmation of that specific incident, but it certainly lends some credence to it for sure, to know that there was so much activity going on in the same area at the same time as these guys reported an actual landed object with occupants. And if you have something land in your backyard, you can go to NUFORC, National UFO Reporting Center, and look up.
Oh, look, if I had an unambiguous event, I would absolutely record as much data and information as I possibly could, and I would definitely report it.
But my point is, someone else's sighting is someone else's onboard experience.
Yeah.
Because they're coming down for someone. If you see a light come over your head, it's going somewhere. It's, so somewhere nearby, someone probably had a much more major encounter, assuming that this was a valid sighting.
assuming it wasn't a spotlight or something else, which is why I'm hesitant to to go crazy on it just yet, right? Because I used to possess a top secret security clearance, right? So I want to be sure. I want to be 100% sure before. I'm happy to make a YouTube video with kind of this is what I think I saw. But if I'm going to put my name on a dotted line, I want to make sure I know, right? And right now I'm in that ambiguous phase that I think we talked about offline. Sure, I see stuff that could be the phenomenon, but there could also be mundane explanations for it. I think I've ruled out most mundane explanations, but the spotlight of some random teenager came up behind my house with an extremely high-powered flashlight, right, and just shined it my direction at that particular time, it could be that, right?
Yeah.
Again, I didn't hear anything, and it seemed it happened so fast. So like I said, I'm just going to start taking a journal, and if things seem to progress and I get something that's a little bit more solid, you better believe I will report it, because I'm looking forward to somebody coming to my house and threatening me, because I want to say, let me see some ID. No ID, go F yourself. Right? Like, you could be some Yahoo off the street. I don't have to believe you. Get out of here. I don't think that's the approach they would take with me. I think they would try to use the patriotism aspect. Yep. But yep. I'm constantly amazed that people who are threatened like that never bother to ask for ID. Right? Like, who are you? Like, why are you at my house? You can't show me an ID? Get out. Like, I have nothing to say to you. You're going to threaten me? Okay, I'll call the police. Right?
Yeah.
And there appear to be a lot of cases like that, right? Or at least back in the 50s.
Yeah, certainly that's true. Government officials showing up, demanding all kinds of stuff.
But how do they identify? But like, how do they identify themselves? So do they actually show ID, or they just say I'm a government official?
In some cases, they will flash badges of some sort, but people, don't have the, like you say, the
presence of mind,
or to really. Authority was a much bigger deal back in the 50s. You obeyed.
Right.
But yeah, some of them will refuse to identify themselves.
Yeah, if they do, I'm just like, okay, well, bye. Right? I could go to somebody's house and say, I'm with the NSA. I'm here to do X, Y, and Z. Like, it's a crime to impersonate a government official. So.
Yeah, there was one case where a guy did that, and they entered his house and were threatening. He ended up attacking them, tying them up. Turned out they were CIA.
Well, that's the other thing too. The CIA is not supposed to be. The CIA is not supposed to be operating. The CIA is not supposed to be operating on U.S. soil. They're supposed to be focused on foreign intelligence.
Yeah. Well, it may have been FBI, but it was some intelligence group.
It's probably FBI, at least internal.
But he ended up having to set them free because they were real honest-to-God agents. And it was a big to-do. That was a case from Leonard Stringfield, who was involved with the coal crash retrievals, and this guy was, telling a story when he shouldn't be. He was under an NDA, non-disclosure. So yeah, some people have suffered for talking when they're not supposed to be on this subject.
Sure enough. All right, Preston, it has been a marathon evening, and it's close to 11 p.m. where you are, I'm guessing. So thank you very much for, again, selflessly, volunteering your time to speak with me, and I appreciate it very much. So look forward to, continuing to see what you learn in the future, and, always love having you on the show. So thank you very much.
Hey, always a pleasure. Thanks, Sean.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.